It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. But are you subscribed? If not, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word about the Christian Reeve Podcast and enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a podcaster, a nerdcore rapper, a retro gamer, all the way from Seattle, Washington in the United States. His name is Steven Kelsey. Welcome to the show, Steven. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me.
Are you awake?
Apologize.
Are you awake? Your phone's...
I'm awake. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just... I forgot about that alarm.
Wake up, Steven. It's time to wake up.
It's time to wake up. Let me reset my camera here. This is the level of professional. I'm really glad that we can really have a moment that locks in how professional I am as a human being.
And this will set the tone for the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, I hope they weren't worried. They weren't thinking it's like, oh, what's this nerdcore musician, this serious, and it's like, yes, but also no, complete mess of a human being. How are you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. It's funny, actually. I'll just talk about that real quick. So I never actually planned to have a particular demeanor for this show. It's just kind of developed over time. I guess like my overall goal with this is to always get my guests talking and, try and find out the person behind whatever they do. Because it's all well and good asking you 15 or 20, 30 questions about your life. But, you want to get that discussion going, don't you? You want to get something out of it, the juice, the good stuff. And I've noticed over the course of my podcast, various different guests, I do take on a slightly different demeanor depending on the discussions, obviously, naturally, But I don't know. I take some pride in the fact that I think I'm able to pop and make all of my guests feel comfortable and laugh. That's my overall goal, is can I make this person feel comfortable and we can get a good conversation out of them. But it's just interesting how that happens.
Yeah, it is. In interviews and such that I've done, it's much more comfortable for me to almost just sort of like turn on the recording, like as the conversation begins. I've let people know it's like, okay, I'm going to start recording now, but we'll get into the episode and then we'll just have our conversation. And then a lot of times there's been a couple times where talking with someone, I've been like, oh, I need to do the show intro. We've been talking for an hour. I'm going to cut that to the front of this, and then we'll just use this conversation if that's good with you. And they're like, oh my goodness. Making sure that I didn't lead them to anything too...
Did I say... What did I say? Did I say anything?
Do I
need to alert my legal team? Like, crap.
But I think that's a lot better. And I think that's... that's the good joys of like podcasts and VODs and YouTube and Twitch, is that it's much more personal. It's much more almost vulnerable, I think, a little bit, than say if you were going on a radio show or you were going on, television media or doing an interview for a periodical. You would definitely have your talking points. There's a structure there versus this, and especially post like in pandemic world, where it's just like, I'm just good talking with someone for like a little bit. Just let me communicate and connect with a human at all today, and that's really helped that out.
Yeah, for sure. And I've spoken about this on the show before, so regular listeners will know where I'm going with this. But when it comes to sort of authenticity as it pertains to, chat shows or even podcasts sometimes, it's interesting. One of the things I've always set about doing with my podcast and my content in general, if you see me in a live stream or you see me doing a video, that's the real me. That's how I am in real life. It's just that, I'm a bit more introverted. I won't be the sort of person to start conversations. I'm quite quiet in real life. But if I know you, if I, feel comfortable with you, I'll be the life and the soul of the party. But that's, I just like to observe and listen in life more than talk. I save all the talking for this, it makes more sense that way. But with that being said, I mean, one thing I've always been intrigued by, especially with YouTube and podcasts too, is this idea that when the camera is off, you're one person, and when it's on, you're another person. And I suppose every content creator, when they first start out, they probably have that sort of decision, conscious or not, whether or
Yeah.
not to put on like a persona. Like, am I going to play a character, so to speak? And I guess like my first question to you, just off the top of my head, it's just random, is have you ever had like a situation where you've been appearing on someone's show and, you know, they basically are completely different off camera and then they put on a persona on camera? Have you experienced that before?
Yes, I have. I have kind of a unique application to this because, on top of like the YouTube and the podcasting and stuff, I've also been like a stage musician.
Ah,
For you know, I'm old now, so over 2 decades. And so I kind of quickly learned that there was a lot of code switching going on at varying degrees depending on the person you were talking to.
ah,
Uh, I find that in the podcast space, or in the spaces that I entertain myself and I'm attracted to most, there's the least amount of mask from most people. I have met some people, especially in the event organizing sort of convention side of things, where I've played at like different like comic book and video game and those kinds of conventions. There are people that absolutely are one person when they're on stage or when they're professionally talking to artists, and then the moment you get them out of that step, they are a completely different person. It's not like a judgment on
mm.
character. Like, it's, I'm not saying, oh, they're all monsters underneath. It's
Oh, yeah,
just very obvious that they put on, I'm a professional at work and this is how I must comport myself,
yeah.
versus this is me having a real human to human conversation with someone. Um, and I think that in YouTube and podcasts and Twitch, the the finer or the smaller distance you can have from a person who you are as a human versus who you are as the person interviewing people or talking with people or playing with people,
Yeah.
the less distance you can have possible, the better. I think that there's an expectation from a YouTube audience that you're having it. So yeah, I've had some times. I've never had a terrible bad experience, but that's because I'm a very pushy, outgoing person. So I kind of
Mm.
register the kinds of people that won't work very early on, and I just don't work with them. I spent a lot of time both in education and then doing this sort of, like social function of being these niche sort of music performance groups and stuff like that I have a pretty good quick read on somebody. And if I don't get like a good sense of, oh, this person seems earnest, this person seems genuine,
Mm.
then it just becomes a, yeah, sure, we'll peer sometime, and then I just sort of quietly ghost them on the internet. No judgment or anything. But most people I can pretty much pick up. It's like, okay, you get a little bit more professional, but otherwise you're yourself, versus you are a character of a human being for an audience,
Mm.
and then after that you're just nothing like it. One of the people I actually do a lot of content with is a little bit like that, but it's more, I think, like yourself, where when the mic isn't in front of him, he is just very quiet. He is not the person to open the conversation.
Mm.
um he's a very like man of few words, and the moment a mic's on, it's like a radio host has suddenly appeared in front of you, and he's just eloquent and considered, and that's impressive. But it's part of him. He's just not he just doesn't feel the urge to use it in day to day, versus when he's being performative.
This is exactly how I am. You know, my
Yeah.
audience will know this as well. I've spoken about it before. I always refer to myself as an I was going to say omnivore for a second, omnivore, and it's by choice as well. Like what I mean by that is that I can perfectly happily talk like this, and you'll see me in real life. I will do that when I want to. It's just that, and I don't know if it's because of being an empath or being, I don't know, having that trait that introverts have, where I get kind
Yeah.
of quite um like my energy is depleted after talking to like lots of people or specific
Yeah.
types of people. But to be honest with you, it only really is like that when it's like a negative person or someone who's very difficult. You know, if it's someone I love being around, my energy doesn't go anywhere. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I'm very selective about who I spend that time with, you know, expending energy. Like people forget that talking is very tiring. You know what I mean? Some people can do it for hours and hours and hours and hours, right? But like, I don't know. I feel like if you're doing it properly, you're actually speaking and, you know, having a deep conversation, not just like talking about the weather and just the traffic or whatever. Like you're actually having a proper conversations. It can be quite tiring. And also, I don't know, over the course of the last couple of years, I've kind of realized like it's much better in life to listen more than to talk all the time, because you obviously learn more and you get a lot more out of life, I think.
Yeah, you do.
And yeah, I don't know. And also, I guess it makes you more interesting because it's like you're a bit mysterious. You're not like constantly talking all the time. You know, there's maybe a bit more to you. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like, but just taking it back to the authenticity thing. I mean, I find that kind of bizarre. And what I mean is that I don't understand how it isn't tiring for those people to do that, to put on that persona. Because one of the things I did from the get-go was I decided I'm not going to do that. Because back in 2013, 2014, when I first started my channel, my YouTube channel, I copied what everyone else was doing. I didn't have any original ideas. I had no confidence. I was like, oh, I'll just do what everyone else is doing. And, you know, I made a couple of videos. They did get some views, but it wasn't me. And I hated it. And I also thought, even back then, that this is a bad idea because you have to be this person all the time. And it's like, that's tiring. And I thought, well, I don't want to be liked for someone I'm not. I want to be liked for who I am. You know what I mean? And I feel like it would be much more interesting if people meet me in real life, like that's still the same person. And, you know, what you were talking about with regards to, you know, professionalism and showing certain sides of yourself, I feel like what I do is I don't hide a lot, but I guess I do hide the very best for like personal friends and personal company and stuff. But like what you see on camera is professional projection. But this is how I, you know, present myself generally, I would say. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm not like Mr. Presenter 24/7, but like ultimately it's mostly like that for the most part.
Yeah, I think there's a very clear line between doing a character or being a persona, and then sort of like the sort of code that everyone sort of develops with to professionally presenting themselves to be like a friendly and approachable person,
right?
But like also not necessarily in a comfortable social space. So this would be like your work, you're at the supermarket, you know, you're anywhere anywhere that you're going to be, or maybe you're even going to a social event like a dinner or like a party or something like that, or to go over to someone's house, and like, you know, one friend, you have that one friend that invited you, and you're just meeting a bunch of people, and you know it's probably going to be fine, but it's that sort of thing. It's first date energy, that kind of thing, where you don't want to go too far from who you are, but you got to be friendly. And I do actually know, I've done a lot of research into YouTube and podcast and like creativity, and I understand the marketing instincts of putting on a character, especially while I'm Twitch streaming. It's an absolute, it's I'm trying to use a non problematic word. It's an absolutely bonkers scenario on Twitch, how people act to get views or to get people excited, as sort of like a performative structure, versus me assuming, and admittedly I am assuming, that most of these people are not this turned to 11 while they're gaming when a camera isn't on them. You know, when they're sitting there, they're not like yelling and screaming, they're not like over exaggerating so many of the emotions, which is kind of the Twitch modus operandi for gaming, is to sort of turn yourself into the most intense, almost like 18-year-old version of yourself, like teenage, fully invested in the game, too caffeinated, too sugared up version of a person.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, though, like, well, you said like, oh, maybe you don't get too emotional playing games. I mean, dude, come on. Everyone's thrown their controller across the room.
Oh
at
yeah,
some game.
yeah.
Like,
That's
you know what I
happened,
mean?
that's happened once or twice for all of us, or a handful of times for all of us. Or you've just rage quit, stood up, and you're like, I need a walk. I'm
Yeah.
done. But like, there are streamers that are doing it 5-6 days a week for anywhere between 2 and 6 hours a day, and they're
Yeah.
keeping that energy the whole time while they're playing, Fall Guys, or while they're playing Among Us, or some such. Among Us is a little different because it's a social game and you're lying to each other, so you can really get invested in that. But if this is an unranked Call of Duty online match, are you really that invested, or are you energized to a degree about people watching you and interacting you, but also really pushing as much of yourself forward as possible to the point where you're kind of unnaturally doing it? And I think that's extremely common on Twitch. I don't think it's a bad thing, because it is there to be entertained. You're there to perform for people to a degree. But I understand how that also applies to YouTube. It was real bad in like the first few years of YouTube, of people coming on and be like, the standard, like, what's up? Welcome to my channel. Make sure to click that like button and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we're just going to jump into like that kind of energy.
People still do that.
Yeah. Is it necessary for everything on YouTube? Some people might be that kind, but I think a lot of people that put it on because that's what the zeitgeist does. That's what the market does.
You got to look at what your audience does, though. Do you know what I mean? Like who your audience? Because like when I see certain YouTubers that like for kids, I'm like, that's fine. That's what kids will react to. That makes sense. But when their audience is like people our age or a little bit younger, I'm thinking, why are you going, hello guys, welcome to this video, and this is what we're doing in this video today. It's going to be absolutely awesome. Oh my God, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and it's going to be fantastic. And it's like, what?
Breathe, calm down a moment.
Calm down.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten into, for years, I've been into this for the last few years. I'm way into the video essayist YouTubes. I love them. Give me 40 minutes on something. Where it's person, and my classic go-to is just like, you don't have to be that. You can be Sean on YouTube, where there's not even a video camera. It's or like 3 arrows, or any of those channels where it's like 40 minutes of someone speaking very calmly and I'm like, there's their own relaxation vibe to that. They have viewers.
Do you know? I don't know why this used to irk me, but do you remember Leafy?
Yeah.
Do you remember, for some reason, the only thing that used to bother me is that his voice would be like this, and he'd be like, okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about why all these people are doing this, and what you need to understand is that this is how it's going to be, and this is how my voice is going to sound throughout the entire fucking video, and I'm only going to do this, so it sounds like I'm in your ear whispering and annoying you, and I'm never going to stop. And it's like, But, I mean, he was successul, so it worked for him.
It was a good gimmick at the time, but like, it is I think it's probably because you're a musician, right? There's an exhaustibility to listening to something that we all work on when we make our videos, de-essers, compression, making sure that things are clear. That minimizes that exhaustion. And when you get up, I'm not going to get up close to the mic. When you get up, I was about to do it, and I'm like, nah, we're good.
Come on.
When you get up close to the mic, when you get up like this, really close to the mic, and you're doing it, all your plosives, all your sibilants is way out front. Your breath is there, and it's so exhausting to hear for a long time.
I hear people do it on TikTok all the time, because I've got TikTok, and they'll be like, they'll hold the mic like this to their mouth and just be like, okay guys, so this is what we're gonna do, and it's completely distorting the mic, and it's right in your ears right now. Like, and a lot of the time when you're listening to stuff on TikTok, like, it's through your phone, but you still get that distorted kind of annoying crap coming through it, and it's like, why don't you just hold it out a little bit? It doesn't have to be right next to your
just
bloody
like
mouth.
This far, just like like 2-3 inches from your mouth. So much better than right there. No, I definitely experienced that. And it's something that when you get into sound design, and especially when you get into mixing for like podcast versus music versus whatever you're doing it for versus say film or even YouTube videos, getting those little details is something that I think it's more, I'd probably forgive it more on TikTok because TikTok is a relatively young audience or a relatively new thing that's cell phone app driven versus say YouTube where you're building a video, or even Twitch where there's 1,000 videos out there being like, hey, how should you set up your Twitch stream? And they're like, put the mic relatively close to your face but a little distant, maybe a pop filter. They basically show you how to do it. With TikTok, it's still very much like Vine was before it, very much like that that young, this is my first version of making content platform. And so for those people, I kind of forgive them. Also, they kind of remind me of those old like YouTube poop memes that would like blast your ears aggressively at one point or another in the
Yeah.
video, which is way overclocked, way high decibel. The LUFs were up at like 10 plus 10, just like burning your computer speakers or your television speakers down with it. And so yeah, that's the forgiveness I have. But I do dislike it, especially in the podcast medium, which is the true audio medium, right? Where I'm like, I need this. There's a reason the SM7B is the universal podcast industry standard mic, is because it makes your voice low and warm and everything at a reasonable distance, and it automatically reduces all those exhausted moments. So that's it's also $400 plus its interface, but like that's the 400 USD plus its interface. But that's the price you pay. So I'm less forgiving it in music, in podcasts, and in YouTube videos. I'm probably more forgiving in TikTok and even Twitch to a degree, though it's not hard to get okay sound on Twitch. Is already compressing your audio so weirdly that you just need something decent.
Yeah, I don't
That's not
understand
right
what
on you.
Twitch does to your bloody audio, man. It's awful. Like
It's
even
terrible.
even when I have this mic, like it's not the best mic in the world, but it's
Yeah.
decent. It's a good podcasting mic,
Mm,
and yet Twitch
yeah.
just ruins it. It's awful, dreadful.
It's one. So I have a suspicion, and my suspicion is because I don't know if you bounce this podcast at. This is getting real technical. I don't know if you bounce this podcast at 128 for the general network broadcast, or if you do 256 for your like MP. I have to bounce mine at 128 MP3 for like Spotify and iTunes and everything, basically to hit the floor of it when I do it for an MP3 form. I have a feeling Twitch is actually doing doing a compressed audio that's either comparative to like a really cleaned up 8-bit wave, or a or something akin to sub 128 MP3, and that's the level of compression, and it makes everything hard. It is the hardest thing to make a Twitch stream sound good up front, especially because it's also usually compressing game noise and sometimes background music into it, and it's not treating those as different audio tracks. So you've got a lot of mid ugly, you've got some bass, especially if the game's heavy on sound effects. It's really dependent on the streamer to just desperately try to mix from what they're putting up to Twitch as well as it can be for it to be compressed down to a 1980s car stereo level of sound. It's bonkers, and it makes me upset because it means that I have to usually, if I want to do anything with it, also separately local record my audio, local record my video, and the sound coming into my computer as separate tracks on something else, and then I'll cut those down because I just simply cannot abide, if it's especially if it's just me, letting all of that go. And so I just overwork my poor computer while I'm doing like retro game streams or things that I'm going to clip for later on Twitch.
Fair play, fair play.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Twitch, tell us about what you're actually doing over there? I don't mean like what are you doing over there? I mean like, you know, what do you actually do? Because I know that you're a retro gamer. I mentioned that in the preamble. Do you only play retro games? If so, which games are you playing? What can people expect from your Twitch?
So my Twitch is so there's a few main thrusts because I'm an old man especially for the internet. I'm just very old. I'm in my 30s, but that's very old for the internet.
Yeah, tell me about it, man. I'm 27 now, and it's like I feel the weight of 30 crushing.
Yeah,
It's
coming, and
it's coming. It's coming. It's like someone furiously banging on a door, and it's like you've got like some flimsy lock that's just about to bust, and you're just like, leave me alone. I don't want to go.
I'm not excited for lower back pain.
I already get that.
It's not gonna get better. That's a PSA right there. It's like in your 30s, it doesn't get better. Like a body health thing. Look forward
to that, kid. That's what your 40s is gonna be. Woo!
Yeah. 2 p.m. Retro Gems, which is 2 p.m. Pacific, which I believe would be about 10 p.m. Your time. Would be usually Japanese role playing games from the 90s is essentially the ethos. And so Super Nintendo and PlayStation and Sega Genesis era RPGs. And I do that for two reasons. Number one, they're a game style that I like and I grew up on. That was like my focus. Those are the things that set like a bunch of franchises like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and all those things kind of came out of that era or exploded out of that era and sort of defined that. And then the second reason is because I started Twitch streaming like so many with the pandemic because I was bored and so I started doing it and I'm like, well, I don't know if I can talk and interact with people while I'm playing a very current game, like while I'm playing even like an Overwatch or something like that. I could do it in the breaks, but while I'm actually in the match, I don't know if I have that ability to split focus. So I'm going to take this retro game format that requires no sense of urgency whatsoever, and I'm just going to play those because I know the games. I've played a lot of the games before. Sometimes I'll play a game that I missed in my youth, but I played a lot of the games before and I like them a lot, but because they're turn-based RPGs, because there's a lot of like wandering around, there's also almost no voice acting in any of them. It's just the old retro soundtrack, the game in like a tiny little box, and then me being able to talk about whatever I want over it, because again, it's a much more low-key kind of relaxed thing. And I do that on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then the other thing that I stream the other big thing that I stream kind of regularly is Dungeons and Dragons.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, and so, but video game wise, it's not always going to be retro. I've done some Fall Guys stuff before. I've never done Among Us, and I'm about to really just blitz Twitch, not with like a plan, but I'm trying to play the game Disco Elysium in the next 2 weeks before Mass Effect, Legendary Edition, the remaster of the Mass Effect trilogy comes out, and I'm going to want to play a lot of that. And so I'm just going to Twitch stream a lot of that. There's no schedule for that. It just means that there's a good chance over the next 2 weeks that during the daytime or during the kind of like 10 a.m. to like 5 p.m. Pacific time frame, I will probably be Twitch streaming because I'm really trying to get through that game. Because once Mass Effect comes out, and then I will also be streaming Mass Effect because it's sort of the final form of the JRPGs I played in the 90s, even though it's done by a Canadian studio, by Western Studios. As far as like story and character development and villain and world-ending level stakes, Mass Effect is very much the modern evolution, or was the modern evolution of what Final Fantasy 4 and 6 and Chrono Trigger and all those games were. Right now I'm playing Breath of Fire 2, by the way. Sorry.
No need for apologies. Never apologize on my podcast. You talk as much as you like.
Okay.
Yeah, when it comes to your Twitch, like obviously you said that you've been doing it throughout the pandemic. So like, how are you doing so far? Like, I haven't had a chance to glance at your Twitch, but like, how's it going? What are your
I'm
kind of
doing
goals?
okay. I don't really have a lot of goals. I use
Mm.
Twitch as an excuse. So I've always said that when you're doing creative things, what you want to do is take things that you already like to do and
Yeah.
just do them harder. Like that's really what it is. And so I like playing retro games, but it's hard for me to justify them because there's already so many new titles. I play current console games. I played current PC games. There's already so much new stuff. So I just sort of carved out an opportunity to do it that was content like content related, and that was enough of an excuse to get me to do it regularly, like to put it into my schedule, because I only stream for like 2-ish hours at a time. A lot of Twitch streams, they'll go 3, 4, 6 hours. I only do it for a couple hours, and I do it in the afternoons, so it's not really in the way of like my evening plans or anything I would do with other people, or my spouse, like spending time with my significant other. So I sort of just started doing it, and I watched the several like Twitch videos, which I'd already been kind of interested in Twitch. I'd watched a fair amount of Twitch, but I'd already been kind of interested. And then a lot of creators that are fairly successful just said, don't try and be whatever this is. Just be what you want to be, but think about the fact that there's people in the room with you. So you've got to hold a conversation to a degree. Don't just turn on the game and play. Interact with the people. There's all these different tools and ways to go about this. And so I was like, well, I can talk, so I'll just talk. I'll come up with topics. So it's going fairly well. I don't push the weirdly enough, I don't push the retro gaming that much because I just sort of advertise it when I'm, like once a week or once every other week, when I'm about to go live, post on social media and stuff like that. I don't push that a lot because I feel like that's the relaxing kind of mid-afternoon kind of hang thing that you just have on the background. And we talk old RPGs or politics or comic book stuff or whatever is on my mind. And then but it's grown fairly naturally, organically. I would say that my goal with it is to have a thing where it adds as a supplement for people to have a conversation with me if they want, between the content that I can't do that with, which is like the podcast or other Twitch streams, like I mentioned earlier, where I'm doing it with multiple people.
I want to press you a little bit more on the numbers because, and the reason for this is because, for those listening who don't use Twitch, Twitch does nothing for small content creators. If you're trying to grow, it's zero. For a long time, I was actually doing retro gaming on Twitch solely and not streaming anywhere else, and it wasn't going well, to be honest. And I stopped doing it because it was just not fun anymore. But what I did discover during that time is that I loved talking at length doing live streams. And I knew that if I would ever build up enough of an audience, that's what I would do. And then someone introduced me to Restream. And basically I started streaming live on Twitch, DLive and YouTube at the same time. And that's what I do every Friday, right?
Yeah.
And through that, I've started to begin to build a community through that. And every Friday we meet up and we have this this live stream, and more people are joining. And because I'm creating content on all these different platforms, right, like TikTok, Instagram, stuff like that, if they like what I do there, they're more inclined to join me and to join those streams, right? And this is what a lot of big successful content creators recommend that you do, because bringing it back to Twitch, you just can't do that unless you will get random people come into your streams here and there if you're playing a popular game or something really niche or something, but it's very difficult. You know what I mean? Like, I was playing old Pokemon games and literally no one was joining. There was a period where some people were joining now and again. I had like one or two. I think the most I ever had from a raid was like somewhere between 15 to 30, but that only happened like once or twice. And it just, I got so sick and tired of just talking to myself that I just packed it in. But now that I've got this kind of live stream thing going on, it works for me. And that's what I've kind of stuck with. You roll with what works. But Twitch, it's like, it's not like YouTube. YouTube, even if you're a small content creator, they do kind of push you. Once they see that you're doing certain things, that certain videos are doing well, they will eventually start to push you. And if you
Yeah.
have a good like SEO profile on the back, you know, things like keywords and stuff like that, they will reward you for that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, absolutely.
as far as I'm aware, like Twitch doesn't reward you for anything or
Well,
help you in.
YouTube's also easier because if you feel like you've made a good video and you really have a lot of faith in the product and it's really like prescient, it's really like current and everything, you can just give Google money to help you along.
Well, there is that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recommend it for a lot of people. I don't necessarily know how much it turns, but like they're gonna put it over in the relevant things and they'll help you with that. And yeah, obviously that's participating in something that's a little less honest, but I'm talking to the creators that are like, I've made this, I think this is really good, I think it stacks up, I've got a little extra money, let's put that in the recommendations. And that will work if the person's individual view, subjective view of their own content actually lines up with a broader audience subjective view or an audience objective view. But yeah, Twitch, no, there's zero discoverability on Twitch. There is zero tools on Twitch to help audience really find specific creators or creators they might like, or those creators to reach that audience. They'll have recommended stuff for you, but it's all already people that are doing well enough. There's no growth discoverability. These are people that already are sort of proven entities to Twitch. And so for me, Twitch numbers are like this. My average afternoon streams, I'd say my average viewer count lives somewhere at around anywhere between 5 to 15 depending on the day.
That's good.
I can get as low as 5, but I can get as high as 15. And so I like to say it's like 8 or 10 people hang out in the room on my 2 p.m. retro gem streams. I
just interject there for those listening. On Twitch, that's very, very good. For starting,
yeah, that's
starting out,
decent
excellent
affiliate numbers.
Yeah.
And then on my afternoon, or on my follower count, I think it's kind of around like 120 right now. Which means that I kind of specifically did what I wanted to, which was position my Twitch time frames and what I was doing at very particular times that I didn't see retro content online. I didn't see a lot of people playing Super Nintendo games or Genesis games or anything at the afternoon time on the West Coast, kind of early evening on the East Coast in the US, and of course later at night there. So I kind of had to pick, and so I did do a little research there to decide if I was going to do it like right away at like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, or if I was going to do it around like noon or 2, and I eventually moved it to 2, and that did well. I have about a 10% subscriber rate, which is nice. That isn't a lot of money, but it means that every 3-4 months, between that and like donations and cheers and stuff, I end up getting a small little paycheck from Twitch. And for now, that is 100% fine, because I did not see Twitch as an income source or an expansion. I always saw it as I want to do this thing, so I'm just gonna Twitch stream it as well. I'm just going to do the thing. It means that I have to put a bit more energy into it, but if you keep your headspace that the point of it is to do the thing, not to have that thing blow up or have that thing become the career, but it's just, I want to play retro games, I want to play video games, I want to play D&D, I'm just going to stream it as well. It means that all of that negativity that definitely comes from when you're streaming for 0 or 1 or 2 people just rolls off. I just literally set up this same exact setup. I'm here, and then I just open up a program and hit go live. I guess I spend a little time on overlays and stuff like that, but it's not, or on design, but it's not a lot of extra effort. For my goal on Twitch, I would love it to get to the point where about monthly I was receiving a little bit of money that would require about 3 to 4 times my current rate. But I don't need it to go past that. And honestly, any affiliate that's getting a monthly check from Twitch is in like the top 3 to 5% of Twitch streamers. There's not a lot. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Twitch streamers at this point. So there's not a lot of money being had by anyone other than the highest of the high, the smallest percent of people.
Yeah, there's certain people on Twitch. There was a guy, I think his name's Devin Nash. I've spoken about this on the podcast before, and he like pretty much just tells people don't bother with Twitch in terms of going affiliate, because it's compared to how much money you can make on other platforms.
Yeah,
there is no comparison. Like Twitch basically takes like 90% of your income or something crazy like that. And it blew my mind learning about that. And to be fair, I don't even think about Twitch at all. Like I have it there, and every now and again people will hop in into my streams from Twitch. And you know, the irony, the funny thing about it, right, is that they'll always ask me like, oh, who are you talking to? Because they obviously can't see the comments, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, we're also streaming on YouTube and D Live. And then they would hop over and go to my YouTube and probably subscribe. Yeah. So it works well. That's what I really care about. But it's
I do think that Restream and things like that, not going affiliate, are a little bit better to stream across other platforms. I know it looks like the numbers are shaking out that if we're talking about the thing you make the most percentage of versus I don't know about the watchability numbers and stuff like that. I don't have those on hand. But if you're talking about the things you make the most percentage of, Facebook right now is the highest paying version of it, which is not that's total bananas. It's not what I would have expected, but it's Facebook right now. And that makes sense to me in a way that Facebook is the only social media platform first, right? So its whole vibe is exposure, even though it loves to charge you for every cent that it can of that, if you're on a page or if you're trying to do that. But Facebook's whole vibe is exposure and feed stuff. So it's gonna throw, whether or not people always pay for it or not, if someone's streaming on it, it's going to throw that stream. If you are friends with someone that's watching that stream, you will see that they're watching that stream. Like, you won't every time, but you will see it sometimes. And that kind of thing can't happen even on YouTube, which is demonstrably better than Twitch as well as a platform. Pretty much everything is better than Twitch to stream on. Twitch just sort of invented the wheel. So having Restream also hit that is just sort of like, you know, having that extra line on your business card if you're streaming. Of it's like, yes, of course I'm on Twitch, but what's important to me is this thing.
Yeah.
Like an office having a mailing address. How many offices actually want to receive mail anymore? None. They'd all like it to come digitally if they can avoid it, or if they can avoid it coming through mail. But you literally have to have at least a P.O. box of some kind to show that you're like a real business that exists. Therefore, I think that's what Twitch is becoming, and it's probably going to fade. I would imagine over the next few years, we will finally see a fair enough migration off of Twitch, probably to YouTube. It makes the most sense, but possibly to other platforms, or stratifying for a little while until someone comes in.
Yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't be sad to see Twitch go. I mean, it just seems like there's constant problems with that platform. You know, everything from like the DMCA staff to, and don't get me wrong, I know YouTube is guilty of that too. But I mean, Twitch is ridiculous with it. Like, you can actually legitimately be removed from the platform for that, and it's like, what for playing a bit of music?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
For those that don't know, I don't know if you've talked about the DMCA Twitch drama, but like the DMCA takedowns, which are basically you have copyright music playing in your video that you don't have license to broadcast to make money off of or whatever. The DMCA takedowns on Twitch was yes, YouTube had problems with these, but YouTube had like some problems with it and then invented situations and tools to manage those problems and processes very quickly and effectively. And it happened at a time when YouTube wasn't a money-making platform for a lot of people. And versus Twitch, which, like, again, knew this was a thing, 100% aware, just didn't bother dealing with a problem that it knew would hit them like a tidal wave. It hit them like a tidal wave, and now, yeah, like you said, we had people whose whole channels were canceled or taken down, whose every clip and video that they had previously was deleted, and saved and just gone forever. Some of them got some restoration, some of them got back there, but that was all Twitch's fault, because Twitch is not a small company; it's Amazon. So therefore, it should have known that eventually record labels would come with these DMCAs like they did for YouTube a decade ago, when it was a much smaller thing and YouTube just invented very clean platform structure. There was no muting the audio on Twitch. There was no, you get a copyright thing, the video doesn't even get taken down, you look at it, and then you can address that as you so feed. It was just, oh, too many DMCAs, your channel's gone. and yeah, it was shocking. So I'm grateful to Twitch for what it did, because it created a thing that didn't exist for mass public. And unless it does some significant changes to its platforms, it needs to go the way of the way of the dinosaur that it is, which is it needs to walk away and let other people innovate and do a better job. And those might be big corporations, or they might be, smaller platforms. Is it Dform? What's the other thing that you stream on beside YouTube?
D Live,
things like that coming in, and doing better work, and better interfaces for people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like you said before, I think it is just tied into name value. And I just want to talk about Facebook real quick, because you mentioned that. Like, yeah, I found the same thing. Like, I have a Facebook page that, to be honest, I only started like properly updating in the last year.
Yeah.
Because I noticed that randomly, they just push your clips, like, and you start getting like thousands of views randomly. Yeah. And it's really random. So now, because I post basically I do long form and short form content separately. So the channel that this podcast will go on is my main channel, my long form content channel and stuff, right? But then I've also got a shorts channel, essentially, and a podcast clips channel, which is a mixture of long form and short form clips, right?
Yeah.
Now, all of my short form content also gets posted on Instagram and TikTok, and then Facebook, because I've noticed that this happens. And obviously, most videos you see on Facebook are short form anyway. So long form stuff can get views, but short form is generally better, right?
Exactly.
And it's
short form and live.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I always kind of pushed Facebook to the back of my mind, because I assumed like, it can't do anything for you, and it's like they just want you to pay for their advertising and stuff. But on the contrary, like, they do want you to do that, but they do push you randomly.
It's the video. I think it's because right now Facebook is in a place where pushing video content on their platform is advantageous for them as a corporation, and it's a great way to sneak around having to pay them money just so that the people that follow your page can see your posts, because it is a weird extreme valley between Facebook like page posts, where you post something up for the people that like your page to see, and a video that they'll just randomly promote to a bunch of strangers. Because you literally, for those that don't know, for people with Facebook pages, if you want your whole audience that has decided to like your page to see it, you have to pay Facebook. There is no natural, like, I suppose your viewers could like and share and comment enough that Facebook's algorithm will actually push it out, but 9 times out of 10 you have to give them a little bit of money, or the people that have decided that they like your content won't even see some of your posts. This is especially true with events as well. But videos, it benefits Facebook. Instagram has the same thing. They're, owned by the same company. Instagram has the same thing, where there's a lot of visibility on Instagram to people who don't know you. And then, of course, TikTok's the master of this right now. TikTok's all about that. And so these things that, with Facebook specifically, you have to kind of play games. Like, instead of having a page, maybe have a group, because groups show people everything in their feeds. So if somebody posts to the group, the person will get a notification as well as on their feed. They'll see it. So like like getting around Facebook's advertising. It's so amusing to me that one of the easiest ways to do it is just post a video to their platform, not a link, but like just a video to their platform that plays, and they will gladly spread that around. And the
Yeah.
video can literally just be an advertisement. You can literally in the video be like, hey, we got a new episode coming out, and then maybe you play like a little clip, and then you're like, come back to this, and it's like 30 seconds. It's clearly a commercial. Doesn't matter, they'll play it.
I think that's why they've been pushing my content lately. Yeah, because I've been doing that. I made the transition. I mean, I still will promote external stuff when it's released, because why wouldn't you? But whenever it's a video that's short, I just post it directly to Facebook. And
that's what they like. That's what they want.
Here's the interesting thing about Facebook as well, that TikTok does as well. So whenever I upload a video on Facebook or TikTok, initially nothing, zilch, forgotten about. But with TikTok, about 7 or 8 hours later, starts picking up views, just like with YouTube Shorts. Same principle. It gets pushed to a bunch of people, sometimes twice or even 3 times. And Facebook does the same thing. So, for instance, I uploaded a video, you know, with that bongo cha-cha-cha song, right?
Yeah.
And that's got like 1.7K now and counting. And I released it maybe, a month ago. And they randomly blow it up. And I think it's to do with what you said. It's when you upload it directly to the platform, they reward you for doing that.
Yeah, they because that's what they want, especially Facebook right now, because it really wants to enhance its video functionality. I have a feeling that Facebook and Instagram are eventually going to make a play to do a full video platform.
Yeah.
But like that's a YouTube comparative. I don't know when their pull trigger is, but the more people that are watching 30-second, minute-long, 5-minute-long, 7-minute, or live streams on either of those platforms will kind of encourage them to do that. So they're just looking to get those numbers. So if you want to advertise on Facebook, we're telling you, just upload videos directly to Facebook. Nothing super long, nothing like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. That doesn't seem to play. But again, minute-long, even like 5-minute-long videos, those play really well on it amazingly.
I actually disagree with you on that. I think that it would make a lot of business sense in some ways to set up a separate platform that combines everything in one and basically start afresh, right? Like, I think it would be advantageous. But at the same time, when you look at specifically the structure of what they're doing on both Instagram and Facebook, they don't need to set up one. And what I mean by that is, and this is not me trying to be nitpicky, I'm just sort of saying, like, because of the way that those websites are used, like you said, Facebook is the gold standard for social media. Well, you know, it's what most people use.
It's the old standard. Yeah,
but
it's
you know what I mean. It's like It's not like a social media platform. YouTube is not really like a social media platform like how Facebook is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The video sharing platform that has social media functionality, whereas Facebook and Instagram are social media platforms with the video functionality. Now, Instagram has done everything under the sun with Reels. You can upload just standard clips. You can put long form content on there now. You can do live. You can do everything, right? Facebook, basically the same thing. But it still boils down to the fact that, like, everyone using Facebook has that one news feed, and whatever they've liked, be it the groups you mentioned, the pages, whatever, they get pushed all of that stuff, whether it's new, whether it's relevant to the things that you search for, advertisements, whatever, they get pushed all of those different things. And I think that style has never stopped working, if you know what I mean.
You are correct. That has never. I mean, obviously TikTok just sort of emulated it for its video by being like, "What if that, but just video share content?"
Yes.
So like it's still essentially a news feed. And like half of my time on TikTok is watching TikToks that I have not followed. You know, like watching creators that are just being pushed to me and seeing if I like them. Which is why everybody should be making videos on TikTok,
absolutely,
including myself. myself, but I just haven't gotten to that yet. I haven't figured out how I want to modify my stuff to it. But yeah, everybody should be making videos on TikTok. It's the platform of the moment for a reason. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter the kind of videos, just make them.
Yes.
And you will find an audience there that you would never get to reach anywhere else.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I set up a TikTok last year. It didn't really get anywhere. I had like 100 or so people, 150, but it wasn't going anywhere. But I wasn't playing the game properly. I am playing the game properly now. And what I mean by that is being experimental, hopping on trends when they come. Just don't be scared. Just go for it. Try it, because it pays off. So, and you'd be surprised the stuff Jesus, TikTok is the only platform that I have where I've gotten to over 1,000 followers. I'm on like 1,700 followers now.
Yeah.
And that kind of blows my mind, especially that like pretty much every video will get at least 100 views now, which is nice to see. But it's like, I think it forces you to be much more creative than other platforms.
It absolutely does. You've got your time limits. You've got sort of the fact that you can't live in a space, right? With YouTube videos, with podcasts, it's about what is this product that you repeatedly put out that you do that sort of feels like you. With TikTok, there's that, but there's also, what are people on TikTok watching right now? What's the hot stuff on TikTok? And I love it so much because no other platform. TikTok organically provides trending for their platform creators every minute. And so you can easily see like, oh, what would be a video that would get me on a feed that did that? And because the videos are short, you're not putting a ton of production time into it. So it's not as exhausting to sort of follow the trends and be like, how do I make this different than the 70 of this video that I've seen? Or 100, or depending on the trend, 1,000. And yeah, I love it. I'm old. I'm in the back half of my 30s, and TikTok is like one of my favorite relaxation devices at this point, of just scrolling through TikToks and enjoying it. And then I get to see what the kids are doing, what the youths are up to. But it's cool. I love it. I can't figure out how to make D&D into it without doing what I've already seen, and more specifically my kind of like branded content. I have a couple ideas. I just haven't like played with an experiment on clipping up my podcasts and Twitch streams into something that I can just push to TikTok yet.
We've actually lost you on video. We have a lovely still of you kind of stuck, frozen in time. And I'm wondering if we can get you back, because I'd love to have you back.
Can you...
It's the moment of truth.
Here,
Are we going to get him back? Are we going to get him back? Is he going to come back?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Okay, let me kill my video.
No.
And
I think this is work. Oh, look! Something's happening. So
yeah,
for those listening, they won't be able to appreciate this. So that's why I say make sure to go out and check out the platform podcast on YouTube, so you can actually see what we do here. But yeah, I see a blue screen of death. What is this blue screen of death?
It's
a light blue screen of death.
There you go. You can get
there.
This
there he is.
My second camera.
Now it's a different camera.
Yeah, it's the laptop camera.
It's like Wayne's World. Camera 1, camera 2.
Camera 2.
Camera 1, camera 2.
Yeah, it's blue. Okay, that's just.
He's gone back to blue now. He's lost his.
No. We're good. We're back. We're back here. We'll just stay on this camera. We'll stay on this camera. My other camera having video problems, but we should be good. Apologies for the delay there. That was typical. We have Comcast in the United States. They're our Xfinity. They're terrible. They're one of 3 major internet providers that control almost all the internet here. And do not, if you come to the U.S., give them as little money as possible. But they all have monopolies and duopolies if you live here. so you have to play with one of them. There's no open options, and so I thusly survived with this. But
Let's
let's go on.
let's talk D&D. You
Yeah.
wanna talk D&D. I want to talk D&D. What is D&D? D&D is Dungeons and Dragons, the popular board game that we all know and love.
Yeah.
I've never actually played it, but I'm aware of it. Let's start with the Twitch side of things. So what are you doing with Twitch as it pertains to D&D?
So with D&D for Twitch, I have a weekly game on Twitch on Tuesdays at like 7:30 p.m. Pacific. It's like 2 to 3 hours, or 2.5 to 3 hour sessions. And we play Dungeons and Dragons virtually. The way that it looks when you watch D&D is very similar to what kind of Critical Role, the most famous D&D sort of stream out there, does, where there's little boxes of camera heads talking, much like a conference call, and usually there's like a pretty overlay or a pretty design around it, some character information, and then you have mini maps. And so I play a lot of D&D anyway, and I'm usually the dungeon master in games, which means I run the games. And so I reached out to a bunch of people when the pandemic started again, and I was like, hey everyone, I want to do a D&D game. We don't have to Twitch stream it, but I wouldn't mind Twitch streaming it. And then for that group, I actually had to randomly roll dice to pick, because I just kind of reached out to like social media and said who would be interested, assign them all a number value, and then roll dice to find who would be in the party. And then they all agreed to be on Twitch. So I was like, fine, we'll Twitch stream it. And then it's just like a normal table game. It's just virtual. So it's all narrative and talking and stuff. And then rather than a physical map with miniatures, we pull in a digital map. In the case of my Tuesday game, I use Photoshop, actually, and I just move their markers for them because I'm very used to using Photoshop. And then I have a Monday game as well, and that game we use Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop that allows people to log in and like move their tokens around and look at the map, and it allows me to do stuff as well digitally and all that.
What's the D&D Twitch community like how big are we talking? Because obviously, D&D's been around for a long time. We're talking, I think it was heavily popularized, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 80s.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's transformed, as you mentioned there. There's a virtual versions of the game. I'm sure there's many different versions. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about the Twitch community and what that looks like and how big it is, and so on and so forth.
The Twitch community for D&D is actually pretty big for like when you're not thinking in Twitch numbers.
Okay.
You're looking at any given time, if you're looking at Twitch, they tend to show people who are watching things in different categories, and Dungeons and Dragons has its own, like category label. And so you're looking at anywhere between 5,000 to 20,000 people at any given time are somewhere watching D&D, unless it's in the very narrow, at multiple time zones are asleep, nobody's playing, this kind of thing. But yeah, Twitch's D&D is pretty popular in the way that D&D players or D&D audience will watch a ton of different D&D content. Like you don't have a lot of Twitch viewers, and a lot of live stream viewers have a handful of people they like to watch, and they'll watch their content, and then that's it. But with D&D, you're watching games, you're watching persistent campaigns, and you're usually watching a group of 4 to 7 people playing at the same time. So you get audience members. If it's something like High Rollers D&D, which has 35,000 followers on its channel, not including the Yogcast channel that it's part of, or Yogcast group that it's part of, you have people that are in like the 10,000 mark watching live, because they all also stream as gamers individually in the video game space, and they all brought their audiences in. So it's a pretty cool thing. My favorite part about Twitch D&D and performative D&D for live stream is that if you want to have a little fun with the audience that's watching it, you can call out to people it while you're playing as a DM and be like, this would normally be a roll from me as the dungeon master. I'd be rolling a dice to see how likely this is going to happen. Would this person like to do it? You know, would this name in the chat like to do it? And I can kind of let them influence the game. There are people that have donated money before simply to allow a player to re-roll something. That's not organized system. I don't have microtransactions in my game. That was just grown out of that person being like, I've donated this much. Can someone re-roll? And I'm like, yeah, fine. And so that's kind of fun. It randomizes it a lot.
I was gonna say you could get. I mean, I know that the objective is to have fun. It's not to make money, but in terms of like good ways to kind of get donations through Twitch streams, that's a great way to to choose how to dictate the game via donations. I mean, why not? Go for it.
Why not? Yeah, if people want to do it, yeah, but they've absolutely like saved characters before. But it's also really fun. One of my favorite things about it too is that when you're Twitch streaming, like for Retro Gems or any other video game, when you're Twitch streaming a game and you're playing it and you're kind of talking with your chat, you can sort of verbally talk, but your hands are occupied. And when I am dungeon mastering, I have to be very deliberate about when I pay attention to chat because I'm usually engaged with other people on the stream. I can't really interact, but my entire table of players can be in the chat and talking with people because you're not always involving your whole group of party members. Sometimes you're doing a one-on-one scene with people, or two people are over here and they're talking, and so they can actually talk. So it's actually a more connected in, like, if it gets big enough to where the chat is just chaos, then you can't do that. But when it's small, for smaller streamers, I think it's really fun because you cannot interrupt the gameplay. The stream is still happening. You're not interrupting the table, but you're also engaging the audience that's come there as one of the players and doing that. And it's one of my favorite things that's sort of grown out of it. Also, its numbers are like better when you starting out as a Twitch streamer. If you do like D&D, getting onto someone else's Twitch, D&D Twitch is a great way to cross advertise, as well as just getting people to watch. In my case, Retro Gems 5 to 15. A lot of times it's like 8 to 10 people. For my D&D streams, it's always 20 people to 30 people, like guaranteed. The worst night I've had is 15. And that's because I just think it's more interesting because it's a continuing campaign. So once someone's invested, they're just going to keep watching it, and they can catch up on the VODs on YouTube if they want, or within the 2 weeks of Twitch. But yeah, I love D&D on Twitch. It's absolutely one of my favorite ways to pass the time.
You're also the host of a D&D actual play podcast.
Yep.
I have no idea what this means. I just have this in my notes. It's known as the Low Armor Cast podcast. So talk us through exactly what is a actual play podcast.
So it can be quite range. So Low Armor Cast actual play podcast means that we are legitimately playing the D&D game, just like you'd see on, like, say, a live stream on Twitch. We're actually playing D&D, but the difference with actual
virtually, like virtually.
No, in the podcast version, because those are with people that I like live with or we're already in my quarantine bubble. Okay. I'm physically there. We're all in a room. We've got mics all in it. It's not my favorite thing to mix, but but we're all in a room. We've got mics, so it's very much a moment of playing D&D like a table would play. The only difference with actual play versus live play is that actual play, I go in and edit it after the fact. So a lot of the confusion, a lot of the discussion of strategies that don't go anywhere, I trim that down. So we might play for 2 hours, and then the audio from it minus the intro and outro and bumpers and insert ad here, whatever, you might actually only have like an hour and 10 hour and 15 minutes of content. I've trimmed a lot of stuff that would be kind of filler time or discussions that, you know, just aren't that entertaining or aren't really kind of focused around the gameplay and the story, and get rid of it. And so that can get really extreme. There's people that get very close to radio drama with their actual plays, and it can be very light. There's people, much like most of Critical Role, where it was just what was being played. They didn't trim out anything in the middle. So if they had a 20-minute discussion about what they should do next, you just listen to that. Versus me, I would pick the part that was the plan, and then that would be all you would hear. You wouldn't hear all the plans that just didn't go awry. So you still hear the table talk, but not that much.
Is there like a video version of the podcast, or is it just audio only? Or
it's just audio only. I am that's actually something that we may set up a video version for YouTube. Because I do want to bring them to YouTube, but I don't want to put in the time to make 1.5 hour long YouTube videos to go with an audio track. And we're changing the location that we record them, and there's a more permanent room. And in that more permanent room, I can take a handful of, like cell phones, smartphone cameras, or GoPros, or what have you, and kind of set them up to sort of auto record and then mix that together. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to do that, because I already have the 2 other campaigns that I'm running, and that are on Twitch, and B, I don't know. I haven't seen a good test for the crossover of the people who listen to D&D in podcast form versus the people who watch it in Twitch form. I cannot believe there's.
He's got a call. He's got a call.
Yeah. Yep. Don't worry. It's done now. I can actually turn. I'm not using this anymore. I should just turn this off now. I was using my cell phone as the camera. The Twitch, there's a whole separate D&D podcast listening community that are not the same as the people that watch it on Twitch or watch it on YouTube. There's crossover, of course, but there is a whole group of people that when they listen to D&D, they just listen to it.
Yeah.
They don't. And so I wanted to, that's another form of it. My entire life is video games and D&D. Like and I guess nerdcore music. There's nothing but niche interests for people that love going to conventions for me.
The reason I asked you that question as well is that, like, I'm kind of intrigued by like how the game would be different in terms of the audience kind of experience with an audio only version versus a visual version. And it's interesting that you say that there's 2 distinct audiences. That makes sense to me, because I imagine that for a lot of the people listening to the audio version, they want that kind of experience where they want to like imagine it. Do you know what I mean? More than maybe like the people that visually want to see it. And I think that, to be fair, you could probably make the same argument of podcasting in general. Do you know what I mean? It's a very different experience. Like, I imagine listening to my podcast must be very different via audio platforms versus the video version. But I don't know. It's interesting.
I can actually speak to this more directly too. High Rollers, which again I mentioned earlier, is a very popular Twitch stream. They originally were Twitch only, like that's where they lived, and then eventually they got a YouTube channel that uploaded their VODs later. And so they had Twitch and they had that, and then they had a new cast member that sort of became their regular cast member, who told them, with a little bit of work, we can do this as a podcast as well. And we just take all this audio and then do it. It won't be the nicest sounding podcast because it'll be, over the air audio, VoIP audio. But it like we can do this really well. And get an audience that wasn't there. And when he was interviewed about it, he's like, yeah, we have our their views end up after VODs on Twitch and such, and then YouTube, they end up having somewhere in the neighborhood of probably about 40 to 50,000 people that watch every episode in video form. And he's like, yeah, there's another like 10,000, 15,000 people that listen to us in podcast form. Those cannot be the same people. And as you know, or as people who research podcasts know, podcast advertising is like the most moneyed advertising that you could possibly get. So that was a really high revenue stream. And so part of his job now weekly is to upload their episodes and everything to kind of add to the value of all the GM and all the players kind of collaborating. Podcast definitely more performative package where it's just like, here's a passive way to receive this. Twitch stream a lot looser, a lot more whatever the audience is kind of vibing on, and also in my mind a lot less efficient to run a game. I can run a game very efficiently in a podcast. I cannot on Twitch. It's very much like in the moment, loose and goofy. And the campaign actually, it affects the narration of the campaign too. It takes longer to accomplish things on Twitch than it does in the podcast.
How would you explain Dungeons and Dragons to someone who's never played it before and maybe has a very basic understanding of it? So basically me, how would you explain Dungeons and Dragons to me?
All right. So Dungeons and Dragons is a collaborative storytelling improvisational game that has a framework of rules that are secondary to storytelling with your friends and using your imagination and having fun. That is what D&D is. It is literally a story world that people create and play in, and lots of people, people don't play Dungeons and Dragons only in the worlds created by Wizards of the Coast, the publishers of it. You can apply that rule framework to any world that you want as a dungeon master or main storyteller or game master or what have you. And then the best version of D&D is simply your storytelling at an audience, giving them things, or at your table, giving them things to play with, and your players use their imagination and storytell themselves back at you. And that's what it is. It's like an improv game. Anyone that's watched improv theater has watched the majority of D&D happen, or what D&D is happening, minus the dice rolling part and the rule set that sort of gives mechanics to the things that we can't just so easily judge and narrate. So the fighting and like the doing things. But what you do, how you do it, that's entirely your choice. That's all imagination. And that's why I love it.
I gotta say, I never understood the hate towards it sort of in the 80s and stuff when well, like when being a nerd, being a geek wasn't cool. I mean, it's interesting to me because when you just look at D&D for what it is, I mean, it's a brilliant game for a kid. Do you know what I mean? It's a fantastic game to play because it really forces you to use your imagination, and kids do that naturally anyway. So it makes sense that it's popular because of that.
Everybody has played D&D in their childhood, or used the same tools to play D&D in their childhood that they would use to play actual D&D. It's literally just coming up with scenarios in your head and playing them out. We've all played with toys and set up scenes and things like that. Did Europe have the satanic panic with D&D that they had in the 80s in the US and early 90s?
I have no idea.
So that was part of it, is that one of the things that was difficult for D&D to get going is that in the 80s, especially by the mid 80s and then into the early 90s, the US at least, and probably portions of Europe, because this is how media goes, had a big kind of conservative move going on. Our president at the time was Ronald Reagan. So big sort of like conservative kind of Christian values. And whenever that happens, much like violence in video games or what have you, or rock music is the devil's music, D&D, because it was such a strange thing, because it was all based on imaginations, and admittedly, because the covers of the books had demons and dragons and monsters on them, D&D was lumped in as a gateway to Satanism and a gateway to all these bad behaviors. And like legitimate network news and like 60 Minutes, which is a news editorial show here, like all these massive tens of millions of parents are watching this, would give time to people talking about how dangerous and how risky playing this imagination fantasy game is. So there absolutely was something that was shutting it down much earlier than just separately from it being kind of like a geeky or a nerdy kind of silly thing to do, especially once you get past childhood. Because it's fun, but it's a very silly thing to be like, let's play imagination game for a few hours. And it's a very silly thing, and it creates silly scenarios which are all over the place in performative D&D and in Twitch and podcasts and YouTube. But the reality is that now that we're in this sort of world where a lot of people could watch D&D, like you can watch Critical Role, you can watch Dimension 20, you can watch or you can listen to things like NADPod or Dungeons and Daddies and things like that. You can hear what it actually is. And what it actually is, it sounds like a bunch of friends sitting around at a table at a pub, like essentially telling each other stories and visiting and entertaining each other, just doing it fictionally rather than in the world. That's all that it really is. And then occasionally the dungeon master, the game master will say, I need you to roll a dice and it needs to be this level or above. So there's like a bit of gamification mechanic, but that part, especially now with all the apps and tools, so easy, so much simpler than it used to be, to just be like, oh, you've never played before? Here's this, walk through the character creation wizard, and then I will tell you as the DM when you need to interact with that at all. Otherwise, don't worry about it too much. It's just a fun way to kind of define who your character is. But you don't need to understand it. You just need to understand, I'm going to say things and then you can do whatever you want. You can literally do whatever, and I'll just tell you how that happens or make you roll dice to see if you succeed or fail.
This conversation is actually making me want to play the game now. It's working.
I recommend everybody gives it a try. It's so easy and fun, and anyone that's played video games is going to understand the rules eventually pretty quickly, because they're all very, like, RPGs are based. Western RPGs, Diablo, Baldur's Gate, all that stuff is based on Dungeons and Dragons mechanic. Some of the biggest RPGs, like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic back in like the original Xbox era, what would be happening is that you would attack someone, and then behind the scenes where the player can't see, the computer would actually be rolling a D20 to see if the attack was successful, like a D&D campaign, just all behind a pretty computer image instead. And so like people have played this game, they just don't know it yet, and when they do it, and they do it with friends, and they go like, they all agree this, like, we're here to have fun first. In the end, they find it, a lot of people really like it, and then some people it's not their jam, and that's fine, but a lot of people really like it as a fun thing, and it can be kind of whatever you want, whatever the group is interested in.
Why do you think D&D is still so popular? I mean, it's been around for 40 years now. It's kind of crazy to think about.
Like, coming up on 45 years.
Oh, yeah, so maybe it was the late 70s then. Okay, I didn't know that.
It didn't. I wouldn't say it got popular in the 70s.
Okay,
it's just that's when it started. I would say the 80s, like Stranger Things, is very accurate. As a representation of when it started really bleeding into the pop culture zeitgeist as a thing that exists. So I would say that D&D is popular despite its earlier versions. Its early versions are very hard to play. Like, I've been playing tabletop for 15 years. I don't understand, like, or it's not that I don't understand, I don't enjoy at all playing the first versions of D&D. They are very mechanical. They're like wargaming. They're much more like miniature wargaming, which makes sense because they were made, the guy that made D&D, Gary Gygax, was a big wargaming fan. So they're very math centric. They're not even what you see in Stranger Things, where kid is like narrating. It's like, and you're walking through a tunnel and you see a Gorgon, and it's like, what do you do? Like, they're much more like discussing strategy. D&D, I think, as funny as it is, the thing that suppressed it in the 80s, that satanic panic, that really like, oh, what's this weird, like, nerdy or fringe culture thing, is sort of what held it together as being the ongoing tabletop, the sort of like benchmark and brand of tabletop, because it's shorthand, much like Kleenex is shorthand for tissue. D&D is shorthand for all tabletop games. There's tons of companies making different role-playing games like that, but a lot of people just all call it D&D. That Fringe stuff really kept it in the media, and then it was kind of the same level of popularity for a long time. Very much you'd see it in game stores, the occasional comic book store. Occasionally there'd be some kids playing it in a public library. Not huge. And then the internet happened, and the moment that people started being able to see D&D being played or see tabletop being played, it blew up in popularity, also with a bunch of tools to make it easier, right? Like to make character creation easier, to make interaction, and then digitally. Like I play so much D&D right now because I can do it on Twitch. I couldn't play 3 local campaigns almost weekly if I was just in the Seattle area. It would be exhausting to drive out, go over to a friend's house, make that time. But because I can just sign in, you can just play. So I think D&D is more popular because of that. But people love telling stories. And so it just had to survive long enough for people to see that that's what the game was. And the moment they see what that's the game is, they get excited about it. They're like, "Oh, I can just tell stories. I can be Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, or I can be Batman if I want to, or I can be this and kind of do my own take on it, or I can just be a foolish character and do my own take on it." That's what makes D&D, I think, exciting, is because you can take the stories that you hear and then retell them your own way as a player. And then the GM, of course, the game master, the dungeon master, we can just create whole worlds, whole fantasy worlds, like you would as an author, and just be like, oh, here's the continents, and here's the politics, and here's the magic, and how this works in the world, and then just give that to a captive audience to play in.
Thanks for sharing. No, you're a nerdcore rapper. We mentioned that again in the preamble, under the name Death Star.
Yeah, Death Star is the main thing. Yep.
What exactly is nerdcore, and how did you get into this?
We're just going through my interests is like going through. It's like, are you lonely? Do you need friends? I'm fully on board for dunking on myself for being a super big geek, because
being a geek is cool now. It's not even.
It is now. But like I didn't. I was this way, 20 years ago. When it wasn't. But so nerdcore
me too. By the way, like I just say that.
Right.
I grew up in the 2000s, and I was alternative crowd, and it's just weird seeing how now being a geek, being a nerd, being alternative is now accepted by everyone, and you just see so many people being hypocrites, and you're like, how the tables turn.
Thank you, millennials and Gen Z, for doing that. It's been very nice to let millennials and Gen Z sort of run with, but what if we weren't dicks about what people liked? What if we just let people like what they like? But anyway, nerdcore hip hop it's a genre based hip hop. The best way to describe it is it's indie hip hop about things that have large fan cultures, usually, or that would have historically commonly been prescribed to geeky or nerdy things. Anymore, it's hard to say geek culture, nerd culture, because there's, Marvel movies aren't geek culture. No one in the MCU, no one thinks that, Iron Man is a movie just for nerds, or the Avengers, or that kind of thing. But the way that nerdcore is specifically different as hip hop, and it kind of gets used to apply to almost all geek music, but definitely hip hop, is that the focus is a bit more on that, rather than just being a normal hip hop song, which might reference Nintendo, or it might reference a superhero or a samurai film or such. The focus is on the fandom culture, or the geeky or the nerdy or the intellectual thing, and that's what's important as subject matter of the song, as either the song's just about that, or it's a filter through which someone expresses their emotions using metaphors and imagery of that. as a thing. So there's a common question of, is this nerdcore amongst the community, which is something like Del the Funky Homo Sapiens Deltron 3030 album, which is a concept album where he's a cyborg in the future and it's all science fiction heavy. Is that nerdcore? Because Del the Funky Homo Sapien usually doesn't do that, but he did it for that album. And the answer is gray, because genre labels are always gray. But yeah, essentially, if you want to hear raps about video games that you like, or shows that you like, or things that reference anime that you like, that's the genre for you. Hip hop, nerdcore. It's a very big genre. And it's got like it's got, funnily enough, bringing it all the way back to content creation, it's got two kind of vibes. There's the classic musician nerdcore, which is like a band or an artist that would like tour and go do live shows and release albums and EPs. And then there's YouTube nerdcore, which is like a YouTube creator that creates a song about a video game that's popular at the moment, creates a video about it, and then writes the rap music to go behind it. And those are two very different camps of artists, because one is less about being the sort of classic musician and the other is more about being the YouTube content creator that just creates these nerdcore raps with it. And they don't really intersect very heavily at all. They're very different groups. There's only a couple kind of crossovers that both do the YouTube thing and live tour.
What are the best and worst things about Seattle, Washington?
Oh, that's a good question. Best thing about Seattle, Washington is the nature, the environment, like the positioning. We're kind of like a light UK. We're kind of like a light England. As far as like the look. Anyone who's been like who's came from like England or Scotland or Ireland kind of recognizes the greenery and everything. We're less dreary. Seattle's known for its rain. It doesn't have real rain. It's also known for its overcast, and it has about 30 more days of clouds than your average state in the US that isn't in California. But the difference is that it's all evergreen. We have very few deciduous trees. It's almost all evergreens, pines, fir trees, stuff like that. And it's got rolling hills and mountains. We've got 2 mountain ranges that are in sight of Seattle. Yeah, it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. So that's the best thing. The worst thing, I'm sorry to ask this, but we didn't really discuss it. Are you comfortable with me getting not so much are you comfortable with me getting gently like social or political on this? Or is that something you like to do with? I'm not going to hit you with any surprise white supremacy or anything like that. That's not who I am. But
I mean, if it's too extreme, I'll cut it. But like,
yeah.
You know, I'm sure it'll be fine.
So the worst thing about Seattle for me is that Seattle is a very liberal, like what would be seen as let me use more universal, leftist city, but not really. And I think everyone can identify this kind of politics where it's like there's a lot of talk about policy and acceptance and welcoming open arm things and progressive policies. But when it comes down to money and policy, it's surprisingly less that way. So if it doesn't affect money, it is that way. There's a lot of gender and walks of life acceptance here. There's a lot of like pro positive, but when it comes to taking care of a homeless problem, or maybe taking care of a homeless problem, or making sure that it doesn't cost too much to have kids, or making sure that rent isn't too high so that people can afford to live, those are not implemented in a progressive fashion or in an outreach fashion. And it is heartbreaking to watch, because the city is so, very similarly to San Francisco, we are so proud of our progressive values, but at the same time not following through on it. And it feels very hypocritical, and it also just infuriates me, because I'm like, we're so close. We have the talking points. We just need the action. But capitalism going to capitalize, and it does not allow for a lot of those kind of hard outreach policies. So that is the truly frustrating thing, is being in downtown Seattle and seeing people that the city on the surface or in press would say that it would help, but it does not help. It just shuffles them around and moves them. I'm big about the homeless population here, because this is a terrible city to be homeless in, and it drives me nuts because we don't have a lot of them. We could house them. We could take care of those people that need it better, and we just don't. And so that's the worst thing. I know that's really heavy and not like geek culture or something fun like I hate all the Starbucks, but that's the thing. That's what I was going to say.
No, thank you for being so honest. I always like to ask people about where they come from, and it's intriguing because, you know, some people are very, very honest in their answer, and they'll say the good and the bad and really go for it. Other people are a bit more conservative with their answers, and I guess they don't want to be controversial, or maybe they just don't have anything bad to say, which is fair enough, you know.
Which is nice if that's the case.
For sure.
Yeah. I always like to be very clear. I deal with a lot of artists nationally here, and there are a lot of, you know, people of color in nerdcore hip hop, which makes sense. It's hip hop, but and they talk about coming here and everything, and I have to explain to them, I'm like, this seems like that, but this is a very, very it's a very on the surface very progressive city, and then underneath it, it's a very kind of like fiscally conservative, not used to a lot of difference. Like there's, you know, it's a big city, but like you're not going to see a lot of different cultures here.
So are the Democrats generally in Washington then?
What?
Are the Democrats typically in Washington?
Yeah. I mean, we can get into this. Democrat. So Washington is really, everyone thinks of Washington as Seattle, and they're 100% right. That's where most of the population is. There's another kind of sister city about 30 minutes, sorry, about.
Oh, sorry. I realized I just asked a stupid question. Of course it is. It's Washington. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Washington. So everyone thinks about it being Seattle. However, that's not a stupid question. Seattle, King County, which contains Seattle and a bunch of suburbs, and then this county directly south of it, which contains another city and a bunch of suburbs. That's where the Democratic Party's base is here. The rest of the state is conservative. So as far as landmass goes, 85% of Washington state is conservative. As far as population goes, about 2/3 of it is Democrat. Now, what that means is that you have a state that has a large population of people that deeply disagree with what I consider is a very centrist Democratic view, but a very, very middle Democrat view of Seattle, like of the Seattle area. And they are in the areas where all of our hydroelectric is, all of our exports. We're the biggest exporter of hops in the United States for beer, and such. And so they have a lot of like functional power in their counties. And then we have a dense population in a city of Democrats, liberals, leftists that do that. That's why during like the Black Lives Matter protests, there was the whole thing where Seattle had its Capitol Hill demilitarized zone. It's a little like protest area. I can't remember its exact same, where they held that for 2 weeks. If that had been in any other part of Washington, there just would have been a breach that night and it would have been dealt with. But because it was in Seattle, they kind of had to play games politics. But again, Democrats in Seattle are very much like I don't want to use the term wealthy elite because that's been pushed up higher, but they're comfortable middle class Democrats, which means that a lot of times they have problems with like the full commitments to things. And though I don't judge them for that, it's just create the political style versus there. So yeah, Washington is definitely on the left of the United States. Or Seattle especially is on the left of the United States political spectrum, but it's still very much in our kind of key, like, how much would it cost to just deal with this problem? A little too much. Let's push it off another year. Kind of politic. And that's very much true in our voter base. But yeah, we're a blue state, as we call it. Voted for Biden as a state as a whole. voted for. Our governor's a Democrat. Our 2 senators are Democrat. All of the Seattle area's representatives in the county that we have, Democrats. That's our party here, because the conservative party in the U.S. is really extreme now. I'm gonna be nice and say it's gotten pretty intense over on the conservative side in the U.S. So
it's pretty
couldn't come there.
I got to say, it's very confusing because obviously when Trump got in, I would agree with that assessment. It did get really extreme, but at the same time, it really did seem like a lot of that time his own party were not fully behind him, which makes complete sense. I'm not like trying to disagree with that, but at the same time, it's like the only time I can think of in recent times where there's been so much conflict within the party. You know what I mean? We, funnily enough, we've had a similar thing with our equivalent in the UK, the Conservative Party, in more recent years, where like they wouldn't be behind that particular leader, and there was like older generations of politicians disagreeing with what the younger, more progressives are saying and stuff, and it is very intriguing because, you know, fundamentally you are all supposed to agree on the same things, but then you find yourselves disagreeing quite massively on big issues.
I mean, that's true of the Democratic Party in the U.S. There's the left side of it, which is like, yes, universal basic income, universal health care, which is weird that we still don't have, all those sorts of things. And then you have the kind of more centrist Democrats. But the leadership and everything is more in step. It was so weird when Trump got elected and the Republican Party, for the first time in my lifetime, and honestly the first time in a long time since the Vietnam War era, since the 60s and 70s, actually wasn't in unified lockstep. The Conservative Party in America, one of its biggest strengths was that everybody agreed on everything all the time politically, as far as politicians went. And it was what made them so effective as a political party, is that they picked their leader, they knew their senators, they all had the same talking points. It was full unity. And then the Democratic Party, which is more left, was the party of we're all arguing amongst ourselves constantly. And we don't like this person, or we do like this person. And then Trump got elected, and it made sense why. George W. Bush was a perfect example of sort of like the Republican Party at its peak positioning, where all of its cabinet members and everything were working to get their goals done. And the messaging was on point from that side, and it was very branded for their voter base, and everything was in there. And as much as Donald Trump absolutely is a conservative as far as like the policies he might implement and stuff like that, he is a wild card that they couldn't trust to be on brand or on message, and it showed time after time again in his term. But they understood that the cult of personality candidate had a large, passionate base. A larger base, a base that would have beat almost every other candidate in previous American elections. He lost this election because of how many people went out, but he put up numbers that were higher than so many candidates previously. And so huge cult of personality. So we really tapped into not my favorite thing in the American zeitgeist, but a piece of the American zeitgeist, and ran with it. And the Republican Party was just sort of stymied, being like, what do we do with this? And then realize something very nice, which is that they can verbally denounce something but not do anything about it, and it's fine. Like, the population is too tired and busy to care enough to do it and actually give them repercussions. So that's what they then shifted to toward the back end, was, this is bad words from this man. All right, continue on. And then that's it. Like, that's all they had.
One thing I find very interesting about Trump that people, or at least I haven't seen been covered a lot in the media, if at all, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, is the fact that, and I'm surprised people didn't see this coming as well, if you look at his political affiliations over the last 20, 30 years, he has flip-flopped between Republican and conservative, and not just like for small periods of time. We're talking years.
Years of time.
Yeah, like there was a big chunk in the 90s where he was with the Democrats, I believe.
Yeah,
and it makes sense. You know, business people in America, you know, it's the same, exactly the same in the UK. You back certain political parties because you want to get certain laws passed or get certain things, you know, maybe smaller trade barriers or barriers to entry or whatever. Like you want to invoke change in some way to benefit your business. I get that, right?
Yeah.
But he did it so many times. It's kind of unprecedented. Normally, like a business person will stick with one particular
generally a party, and then they might change on some positions.
Yeah,
but
like a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't covered a lot after he was the Republican candidate, because so if you were to deconstruct the kinds of things that allowed him to align with the Democratic Party versus the kinds of things that allowed him to align with the Republican Party, they're not that different. And that was really the thing. Like you said, it was much more business advantageous things. The Democratic Party in the 90s was a very much what a conservative party would be in Europe now. Well, maybe not now, like 10 years ago. Because it was doing deregulation of financial institutions. They were reducing taxes at the top layer. They were creating more business tax write-offs and more business tax exclusions. They were doing a lot, and the reason that they were doing that, and we can really like, I love political history because Trump was like almost an inevitability politically, not him specifically, but that kind of person, and it was callable from. It was callable from 2 decades ago. You could have easily been like, oh, eventually, either the next one or the one after that is going to be a cult of personality candidate, and it's because of Reagan. Reagan forced the Democratic Party to shift its policy really aggressively because they could not get past how popular Republicans became leading up to and then exploding during Reagan. So there was no way they were going to compete on a national scale without moving the needle to different talking points than they'd had pre-Reagan.
What is the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
Oh, that's a good podcast question. Biggest life lesson I've learned so far, and we've touched on it a lot here, is like as much as allowed by society and the life that you have to live to survive, as authentic as you can possibly be. Do not waste any time if you can avoid it, not pursuing the things that you want. We all have to work, we all have jobs, we all have things that we are required to do, but at least while you're doing them, you can be as authentic as possible without getting fired from them or excluding yourself from them. Be you as much as possible. The whole reason I'm fine with Twitch being a slow growth or a YouTube video not doing well or a podcast, listening episode being like, well, that episode didn't have as much 24-hour download, is because I am literally just doing things I want to have fun with for that purpose. If they're successful, great. If they're not, to me, they're already successful because they're things I want to do. And that's true in workplaces, of being as authentic as possible to make work more pleasant to me. That's true. So be who you are. If you're quiet, if you're reserved, that's cool. If you're loud, that's great. You got to survive. But other than that, be who you can be as much as possible. You'll love life a lot better. Life will be much calmer. You'll have a lot more fun than if you try to be the most successful or be what you think you need to be. So that's the biggest lesson I've learned, because I was not that way until about my mid-20s. I was very manufactured.
Thank you for sharing. As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, I definitely, we've talked about a lot of my projects. The Dying of Exposure Twitch channel and Low Armor Cast are sort of, and YouTube are sort of like the big three. I am going to be releasing 2 things in the Nerdcore. If you're interested in nerdy music, and you're interested in music that's about like science fiction and fantasy and in comic books and stuff like that. And in midsummer, so sometime in July, both Death Star, as well as me as a solo artist, which is just Steve, um, uh, will be there'll be 2 EPs coming out from both of us, accompanied by music videos on YouTube, which I never used to do, but I am doing now. And they might just be AMVs or little clip togethers or picture videos of me just rapping at my desk with some B-roll and other things going on. But there'll be videos on YouTube. So I would say probably, I don't have exact dates for them, but July is the month. And so if you follow me on social media at Dying of Exposure, you're going to find everything about that, because I always filter everything I'm working through that social media.
Listen, Steven, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. So I want to say thank you very much for being such a great guest.
Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate it. I love that we started off talking about the mechanics of streaming and content creation. It's one of my favorite topics. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I guess we've been talking for a couple hours, so we should probably wrap up.
Should we maybe end things?
maybe it's the standard podcast length, 2 hours plus.
To be honest with you, I always just end it when it feels right. I try to
when it's winding down.
No, not even. I mean, I always look at, have I asked all the questions that I wanted to ask? Have I had a good discussion with this person?
Yeah.
Have I really gone the distance with this? And
when
I feel it's right. Yeah.
Honestly, I was prepared for you to cut topics for time. Be like, we're gonna do D&D, and it's like, we don't have time for Nerdcore or anything else. Let's just cut.
No.
Like I've had it be a situation where I've come on. I usually don't try to promote one specific thing. I'm good with whatever people want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But I come on and they're like, yeah, we want to talk about this, and then an hour in, they'll just be like, all right, well, we have to wrap up. Sorry we didn't get to this. And I'm like, that's fine. I just came to chat. I don't mind whatever we talk about. We could have literally, if you just had wanted to, if we'd started on politics earlier, we literally could have politicked the whole time. I can
see that. I can see that. I can see myself going down a real rabbit hole with you on that one.
Yeah, I'd be like, oh, do you want to understand, Nixonian Republican strategies that have led us to the modern conservative xenophobia U.S. that we live in today? All that stuff. It's absolutely an interest. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking some time for me, and I look forward to doing it. Do you have an idea of when this episode or this stuff is going to start trickling out? I don't know what your turnaround time is.
It's about as fast as I can get it out. It'll be out. But my process, I don't know if my listeners actually know about this, but typically my turnaround time for an episode is normally the next day. It's actually pretty quick.
Woo!
But when it comes to cutting out clips, that depends. That can take time.
That can take a long time. Yeah, there's other podcasters that literally they'll be like, all right, we did this interview, and then 4 months later is when the episode comes out, because they have that big runway.
That's affected me, because I've also, as I've obviously started podcasting, I've also started appearing on other people's shows for promotional purposes. And there's been times when people have done that, and then the information is no longer relevant. Like there was one that was released recently, and in the bit where she was like, oh yeah, plug what you want to plug, I said, oh yeah, this channel and this channel, and I'm doing it. Like I mentioned at the time that I was doing retro gaming. I don't do retro gaming anymore. So it's like, if people watch that now,
they're like, why doesn't he do
that? What's going on there?
I suppose since the turnaround is fast, I would love to plug something that's happening now. That's really, really fun, because I kind of did something. I was like, July, it'll probably be out before then. So there is, if people want to get into Nerdcore, figure out what it's all about, or figure out the variety of it, there is something happening right now called the Nerdcore Vocalist Producer Challenge. It's run by the Nerdcore group on Facebook. And what it is it's a bunch of nerdcore musicians, producers, and MCs that form teams together. And a lot of times we tend to form teams with people we don't normally work with. And so it'll be a duo of a producer and an MC. And then every 3 weeks, there'll be a new song challenge. And it'll have guidelines like it can't be in a 4/4 time signature, which is your standard like rock and dance time signature. It'll be in 3/4, which is more of a waltz. Or an odd time signature like 5/4, which is what you'd hear like Primus songs in. Or a lot of jazz music for that matter. And then like or there'll be a thing like this has to be scene from a video game, so you have to pick the style of video game from this list and then the scene or like the moment in the video game from this list, and that's what the rapper has to do. Or you can only use live instruments, or you can only do this or that. And what it means is that in one place every 3 weeks, this year's competition, roughly about 40 teams are uploading a new song on a playlist that you can hear. And so you can just go and listen to a ton of different nerdcore artists. You don't have to do any research. You don't have to spend any time. It's all conveniently on nerdcorevpc.com or the Nerdcore VPC playlist on SoundCloud. And I'm competing it in this year, as well as the main producer and DJ for Death Star on a different team. He's judging it, and a number of other nerdcore artists. You can watch talkbacks about it on Twitch. A bunch of us stream about it. But yeah, it's a cool place. So for the listeners, if they want to figure out what nerdcore is all about, they can just go to nerdcorevpc.com, listen to the music there. We just did round 2. So round 3 is up in a couple weeks, and there's 5 rounds. So there'll be a ton of music to just enjoy and find out. And there's songs about Duck Hunt. There's songs about Quake. There's songs about Star Trek. There's songs about whatever you could imagine.
Well, listen, best of luck with that. Once again, thank you very much for being on the show. And to all my listeners, make sure you go check out Steven's projects. He's a stand-up guy, and he's clearly got a lot of cool interests. So yeah, go check all of that out. And if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, as always, please make sure to, I don't know what that was. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, please leave us a review. I want to see more reviews.
Oh, those podcast reviews are so necessary.
I've only had a few.
Yeah.
I've had one on Apple Podcasts.
I've only had the one on Apple Podcasts. But yeah, those follows, they are everything in the podcast environment. Even a few of them. Just take a time, put in the little stars, especially on the Apple stuff, and then take a time, even if you write, I really like this podcast, done. Like, put it in there. It helps so much.
Absolutely. And just let us know who you would like to see on the show next, what you would like to hear us discuss on the show next. And until next time, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.